Hello and welcome. You're watching TVP World's special edition. My name is Evgeny Rusakov, and our special guest for today's program is Her Excellency, the Ambassador of the United States of America, Kara McDonald. Hello and welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's a delight to be here.
So now you're in Vilnius already for a couple of months. So how do you find it? Have you already found some favorite places?
We love it here. We have already started to feel very settled in as a family. We are grateful to all of those who have welcomed us. It's been a tremendously warm welcome. You know, the United States and Lithuania are really partners in freedom, and we feel that, and we're so grateful for the welcome that we've had. We have indeed had a little bit of a chance to explore. We've been down to Druskininkai, we've been up to visit our troops in Pabradė, we've been out west to the coast. I must say, from a personal standpoint, I grew up in Michigan, which is north in the United States, and it's right on the Great Lakes.
We'll come back to that.
Yeah, so it feels a little bit like coming home because some of the topography, some of the landscape is very similar to Michigan. So we feel very at home. In terms of favorite places and whatnot, we have had the opportunity to explore a little bit in Vilnius. It's a wonderful culture here in terms of coffee shops and restaurants and gastronomy. So we have certainly taken part in some of that.
Now let's come to some more serious topics.
Yeah.
Relations between the Baltic states and the USA. So they're really good, but there are always some room for improvement. What do you name?
Yeah, thank you for that. So it is, in my view, never been a time when our relations between U.S. and Lithuania have been stronger. As I mentioned, we're partners in freedom. Our relations are very strong. But it's also a time when our relations have never been more important. And I think in that context, there's always more we can do to strengthen the relationship and things that we are doing. So first and foremost, in terms of my priorities here, is security. Security of this region, security of Lithuania, a NATO ally, a treaty ally. Second is really strengthening our mutual prosperity in the commercial and economic fields. We can talk more about this, but this is an area that I'm very energized to strengthen our relations in. And then finally, in terms of priorities, I would say strengthening our ability, the U.S. and Lithuania, to project freedom. Freedom in this region, freedom globally. And Lithuania has really been a leader in this.
In one of your first interviews as a US ambassador, you stressed that those who took part in the Holocaust in Lithuania should not be glorified. So unfortunately, Lithuania still has some monuments and some places. So will you continue to take your special interest in that topic? And what's the solution in this case?
Yeah. You know, we feel that it's very important, not just here in Lithuania, but worldwide and in the United States, to tell the truth about history. There are so many that seek to manipulate history, to revise history for personal gain, for political gain. We feel that it's very important to be honest in a truth-telling, factual truth-telling about history. I, as you know, come from a background where I've worked deeply in the human rights field and democratic values. You can count on, you can rest assured that this will be an area of priority for me, for our mission while I am here. And yes, in interviews I have stressed, and in fact I've done a lot of work already in my first 3 months here, events, engagements around the issue of truth-telling, specifically with regard to the Holocaust. Very sadly, I think, this region is not immune to issues of anti-Semitism, of Holocaust revisionism. And we feel that it's very important, as you mentioned, that we not be glorifying those who participated, who are known and factually established to have participated in the Holocaust. The memorials to Krikštaponis in Ukmergė, to Noreika here in Vilnius, we hope that those will, in one case, not be replaced, and in the other case, be taken down. We feel that that is part of coming to terms with history. What I will say is that the Lithuanian government, our Lithuanian counterparts, the Jewish community here, have been tremendous advocates of telling truth accurately of history, and we look forward to continuing that partnership. And let me just say, too, Lithuania, again, has really been a leader worldwide in the human rights field, in providing safe harbor to those who are striving for freedom in their own countries, in the field of human rights. And I think specifically on the Holocaust account, we really have to commend Lithuania that over the past 15 years, it has put $80 million into symbolic restitution. That's something that a lot of countries have not done. It's remarkable. And so I think some of that leadership really is worthy of commendation.
By the way, talking about Lithuania and maybe Lithuanian officials, don't you think that Lithuanian officials should just tell the truth, how it was, accept it, and give no any extra card for Kremlin's propaganda, for example?
Yeah. You know, I think it is very, very important to constantly be vigilant against disinformation, against propaganda, to be building resilience within society. I think this is an area, again, that Lithuania, where in many of its minority communities, its Russian-speaking population,
Sure.
we've really seen a strong emergence of capacity of resilience, of being able to tell truth from fiction, being able to look through, verify sources, parcel out, identify propaganda, and call it out when we see it, that this is not factual, that this is not correct, that this is not true. And certainly that's been an area that we have been very engaged in as an embassy, and you can, again, expect that our mission will have as a priority.
You mentioned the word resilience, and I already remembered war in Ukraine. So
Yeah.
military support to Ukraine has played a big role, a big part. And just a couple of weeks ago, there's been a breakthrough in US Senate and US Congress with that $61 billion package. So in your opinion, will this positive attitude amongst congressmen continue?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. First, I want to just say how important in our mind that package of that supplemental assistance is. The U.S. record on Ukraine is clear. No country singly has done more than the United States support Ukraine. But it's so important that we continue to support Ukraine. We believe that Ukraine's security is our security, it's European security. It is our partnership in freedom, again, that we support. And what this package does, we believe, is it continues to allow Ukraine to stand up to defend its territorial integrity. That package, though, let me say, is just from the United States. The European collective has given more than $110 billion. So this is not just about the United States. This is a coalition of countries that has chosen to stand up and say, we support Ukraine. Why? Because what Ukraine is defending is not just Ukraine, but it is our international system of state-to-state relations. It is the ability of a small or medium-sized state to exist, to say that we're not going to be invaded by a larger neighbor, that we are not an international system of bullying and aggression. We are an international system that is based on international treaties.
But then there's another US official, John Kirby, comes out and said that conflicts in Ukraine and Israel are, well, different conflicts. So what's your take on this? Don't you find it a bit hypocritical towards Ukraine? And I mean, don't you think that Kremlin could take that as a weakness, a sign of weakness from NATO in just defending Ukraine?
So I don't think there's anything about what NATO has done that says weakness. In fact, it's quite the opposite. What has happened in the last 2 years? NATO has grown. It's enlarged in a historic transformation. 32 members with the accession of Sweden and Finland. Absolutely historic. And by the way, incredibly important for this region. The Baltic region, the Baltic Sea, you know, we call it NATO Lake, right? Because it's basically circumscribed
Sure.
now by NATO members.
With just one spot.
Small piece, right,
Exactly, yeah.
that we could talk about. So I do think that it is very important to recognize that what this war has done is it has only strengthened, it has only unified, it has only increased NATO's motivation for preparedness and defense. NATO is a defensive organization, but what we saw happen at Vilnius was a historic transformation in the family of plannings, the forward movement of troops to the eastern flank. That's part of what our assistance does, both through NATO but also bilaterally. So I think it's very important to see the projection of strength that is both the NATO platform as well as our security assistance between the United States and Lithuania. And we can talk about it, but you know that we have a presence here of just over 1,000 troops, about 1,200 troops, persistent rotational basis, It is the troop presence, it is our training and exercises that we do in tandem with our Lithuanian partners. And then it's also about procurements, ginning up that defense industrial base to be producing at a level that needs to support both Ukraine as well as national capacity along the eastern flank.
Now, a very, I'd say, vulnerable and very hard topic is relations with Russia. So Russian authorities constantly say that US is Russia's main enemy. What's your take on this?
So the US has never sought escalation or conflict with Russia. I think if you look at Russia's actions, it would be very hard to argue that it is either a predictable or nonviolent neighbor. It is not just about aggression in Ukraine. We see Russia's aggression from 2008 in Georgia. That continues today. We see its cooperation and threats with regard to Transnistria in Moldova. It continues today. We see the meddling in our own election processes. It's a big election year, both in Europe and in the United States. We see that meddling. We see the propaganda. This is not a country that has proven itself to be either predictable, reliable, or nonviolent. It has been violent, it has been aggressive, and so in that regard, we have been very clear that both we as the United States, but not just us, the community of countries that stands up to say, no, you are not allowed to be a violent country towards others. And I might add, it's not just Russia's violence towards those around it, it's also to its own people. We've seen the degree of repression that has come out of Russia. And unfortunately, in our view, this internal repression is really one side of the same coin of its external regression. It's all stemming from the same place.
But okay, let's then take the same topic from another angle. Russia is trying to contrast its traditional values with American liberal values, which to some extent unites it with Islamic states. So don't you see any threat as a representative of the Western world?
So we like to think of this not as American values, even though our country is rooted in these values.
Let's put it European values, democratic values.
Democratic values, yeah. So democratic values is how we see the post-World War II era architecture established. Why? Because there's an understanding that democratic values brings the best security, it brings the most reliable treaty partners, and the best opportunity for mutual prosperity to grow. So that was sort of coming out of World War II, the international architecture and international treaty system. The United Nations is founded on these values. So that is very much the core international institutions that we rely on to govern state-to-state relations. I think these are the core values that Russia is challenging. They're not just American values. These are core UN values that Russia is challenging. And I think it's very important that we all be clear-eyed about how Russia is trying to undermine those core United Nations, international, and democratic values.
I was looking for some information about our ambassador of the United States to Lithuania. I came across the information that you also speak Russian. So does that knowledge of Russian help you to understand the peculiar Russian way of thinking?
You know, I think it's always very important when we work in international relations to be studying the language of the places where we serve. Yes, it is important to be studying language because it does open up access to understanding culturally of how societies are framed, how they come together, how they express themselves. But certainly very much, I'm focused obviously on Lithuanian language, but very much continue to be interested in engaging with all speakers in Lithuania, in particular to the Russian-speaking population.
Okay, now we come across Lithuania, and Lithuania is today celebrating its 20th anniversary as a EU member. So how does your country assess the relations with the EU?
Yeah. It's, as you say, a tremendous year for Lithuania. 20 years in EU, 20 years in NATO, very, very important relationships. You know, I think back personally, 20 years where I was. At the time, I was working in Romania, which was also trying to become an EU state, negotiating EU membership. And to me, it is remarkable that at the time, I think back to the hand-wringing, the concerns about enlargement. Is this EU enlargement project going to be safe? Is it going to promote prosperity? Is it going to make sense? And I think 20 years looking back, it was an absolute bet that paid off. For this region, for Lithuania, I mean, look at what Lithuania has accomplished in 20 years. It's truly remarkable. And that is both as an EU member, as a NATO member. In terms of the United States and the EU, we represent over half of GDP with our populations and with the trade that goes between the EU and the United States, over $1 trillion in trade. It's truly remarkable. So when we talk about transatlantic cooperation, we're not just talking about security or NATO. We're also talking about all of the economic activity, the wealth, the prosperity that is generated through partners. And I say partners that are, again, founded on the same values, that democratic set of values, that set of values that speaks for freedom. Why? Because we feel that it is that context of values that provides for this kind of prosperity to be generated.
This summer, Washington will host the 75th NATO summit as well. Do you think it will be historical for Ukraine?
Yes, so important. Such an important moment, both to reflect and celebrate and commemorate the 75th of NATO, but as you say, also to project that security in the region, to describe and to outline what the bridge is for Ukraine to NATO. NATO members have said Ukraine will be a member of NATO. There's not currently consensus on an invitation this summer, but there is, I believe, consensus on looking at what the next steps are to bring Ukraine's capacity in terms of its ability to defend and deter up to a capacity and a standard that really, for very practical purposes, it needs to have building out a generation, really. If you think about the task in front of both NATO, the member states, and Ukraine with regard to defending its territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine, it's not just about regaining territory, it's also about deterring Russian aggression into the future. And I think that is very much where NATO is focused in terms of capacity building.
Very important topic, the US elections.
Yeah.
According to some political scientists and experts, they say that Joe Biden is too old for another presidency. On the other hand, Donald Trump, who is also running for the presidency, is just 4 years younger. So what's your take on this? Does the age matter?
So the wonderful thing about democracy is that it doesn't matter what I think, it matters what each voter thinks. And each voter is able to vote their conscience. But let me just say a couple of quick things. It is a big election year. Not just for the United States, but also in Europe, with European Parliament, with the leadership of Europe, a number of countries, I think it's around 10, maybe a couple more, that in Europe, including Lithuania, having election cycles. It's a very, very important election year. I can't speculate on the US election. I'm a career diplomat, either on the policies or who might be elected. What I can say is that support for this region is broad, it is wide, and it is deep. Before I came out here, I did consultations across the political spectrum with Republican colleagues, with Democratic colleagues, with independent colleagues. All I heard was the deep and wide support for NATO, for this region, and for the eastern flank.
In the beginning, you mentioned that you're from Michigan. So I myself into music very much. And I know that there are loads of famous artists and musicians from especially Michigan, like Eminem, then Stevie Wonder, Aretha Franklin, Madonna.
Yeah, Madonna actually, and I went to the same university. She actually lived on the same hallway at the residence, different years. I'm not the age of Madonna. Different years, but same dormitory at University of Michigan.
What, in your opinion, makes Michigan so special?
You know, like Lithuania, it's a cold state. It's got a lot of snow through the winter. It's got four seasons. It's got full 4 seasons. But I think that inspires some creativity, you know, outlet for people when they're inside, when it's cold outside. But again, for me, this has been really interesting to see the similarities between Michigan and Lithuania in some ways. I talked about the coastline. I love going to the coast here. Why? Because it reminds me of where I grew up. I grew up on the lake shore of Lake Michigan with the dunes. It looks a lot like the Curonian Spit. But I do think there are some similarities and on the artistic front as well.
Kara, thank you so much for this wonderful interview. I wish you best of luck and
Thank
hope
you
to
so
see you
much.
once again.
Thank you so much, Evgeny.
And I would like to remind our viewers that our guest for today was an ambassador of the United States of America to Lithuania, Kara McDonald. You're watching TVP World. Stay with us.